president. And I just gave a report that we are going to have the symposium, first symposium hosted by the first batch of PhD students. She said, unbelievable, unbelievable. This is the first time. This is the first time the symposium hosted by the student. And she just asked me to send her thankful message to 9 of you and also all participants attend this symposium today. This the message from our BAU President, Associate Professor Marini Jatopama. It is my personal appreciation to realize that this first ELT Symposium is organized for the first time by the first batch of PhD students. Moreover, lecturers, scholars, students, and distinguished guests from well-known institutes from both Thailand and overseas have been officially invited to take this academic event. Some of them from Mahasarakham University, some of them from Vietnam, some of them from other countries as well. So you all are welcome to our webinar. Please keep in touch. I am very certain that this symposium will contribute to the applications of academic and research works on teaching world English. Moreover, this symposium will promote and strengthen academic collaborations between BRU, Buriram Rajabhat University, and academic partners, both in Thailand and overseas. On behalf of the PhD in ELT Program Chair, and also the Dean of Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, BRU, I warmly welcome invited speakers, researchers, scholars, lecturers, graduate students, and all participants to the symposium. Last but not least, I would like to express my sincere thanks to our invited speakers, Professor Dr. Ni Hlaing from Mandalay University of Distance Education, Myanmar, and Dr. Eric and from Mahasarakham University, Thailand. And also my thankful message goes to all participants from different universities in Thailand and overseas for their academic support and contribution. I wish this symposium successful and academically useful for everyone. At this auspicious moment, I would like to declare the first ELT Symposium 2022 on teaching world English officially open. ขอบคุณมากครับ Thank you very so much.
Thank you very much, Associate Professor Dr. Ni Hlaing, our PhD Program Chair and Dean, Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, Buriram Rajabhat University, for presiding over the symposium. And also thank you very much, Mrs. Vipaporn Dangsi, our PhD in ELT students, Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, Buriram Rajabhat University, for delivering a reporting speech. Next, it's our photo session time. May I invite the Dean, invited speakers, all participants. Please turn on your camera to take group photo, please. And please smile. Okay. Is everybody? Okay. 1, 2, 3. Okay, one more time because we have a lot of participants. We have
Sirapapa, why don't show the victory
okay,
symbol, like
everybody, please thumbs up, please, for our very first symposium.
I give you 2 thumbs up, yeah.
Okay, okay, 1, 2, 3, smile. Okay, hold on, 1 more pages. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you so much, everyone. To ensure a smooth webinar, the following recommendations are provided for participants. First, make sure you have your mobile and computer devices fully charged. Second, make sure that you have a strong internet connection. Third, check your audio and video settings on your computer or mobile device. Fourth is after joining the webinar, please mute your microphone to avoid side noises. And if you have any questions, you can type your questions at any time during the webinar in the chat box. The speaker will answer them after their presentation is finished in the Q&A sessions. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a very good time to begin our first sessions of our symposium. Before we begin, may I introduce our first invited speaker. Dr. Eric A. Mbele is a lecturer and researcher at the Department of Western Language and Linguistics at Mahasarakham University, Thailand. He holds a Ph.D. in Applied Linguistics and is an author, co-author of numerous articles and book chapters. His research interest focuses on global Englishes and English as a legal funga, sociolinguistic, English medium instructions, teacher education, beliefs, attitudes and identity, discourse analysis, intercultural communication, innovative research methodology. And today he is here with us, and his title of his speech is World English in ELT Teacher Education. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me to welcome Dr. Eric A. Mbele.
A very good afternoon to everybody. Just to check, can you all hear me?
Yes, we can all hear you.
All right, I'm going to be using two devices, one of which will be just to share the PowerPoint and the other one will be for the video, if that's okay. So kindly confirm if you can see the PowerPoint, please. Can you?
Yes, we can see your PowerPoint and we can hear you clearly.
Okay, that's good. So let me begin by, all right. So let me begin by saying a big thank you to the PhD ELT students at Rajabhat University. I really want to join my voice to that of your program chair and dean of the faculty to say you guys are doing an extremely marvelous job. It's remarkable indeed to see how much you're able to do and achieve within just 1 year being in the program. This is extremely remarkable, and keep doing your good work. And just to let you all know that personally, I'm proud of you all, and I'm sure your university should be proud of you all as well. To all our audience members in Thailand and those overseas, it's good afternoon from Thailand, and thank you very much for joining my session of the 12 today. As I've been introduced by our facilitator, I'll be talking to us this afternoon for a couple of minutes on World Englishes in ELT teacher education. As you all know, that the focus of this first ever symposium organized by the PhD students at Buriram University, it's on teaching world Englishes. This, by implication, suggests their awareness and understanding of trends within English language teaching education. While the whole notion and concept of world Englishes has been somewhat lukewarm in terms of welcoming and applying them within teachings in given context, it's really indeed applaudable to know that BRU ELT PhD programs seem to recognize this trend, and they dedicating a symposium as this just to talk about this. So that's quite impressive. So today I'm going to be looking at this particular topic from a teacher education perspective, and I should be able to throw some insight or some light into what English is again. And I'll try to connect that to English as a lingua franca, giving you ideas about how English is being used today. Hopefully, I should be able to justify why I still think that teacher education or teacher educators form a pivotal role in spreading this message and be able to give us some implications to how and just how we might apply this within our English language teaching context. So let me give us a few background into world Englishes, just to let us all understand, and I'm sure we all know that the status of English has changed. Discussions about the spread of English, its global spread across different countries and nations has been alarming. English has gradually moved from being spoken just in native English speaking context, like the UK, US, Australia, part of Canada, and New Zealand and other countries, and it's now widely used in other contexts. English is being used either as a native language in these contexts I've mentioned, or it's used as a second language. If you think about post-colonial context, that's countries that were once colonized by either Britain or the US, and for which they use English today as an official language. You think of countries like Nigeria, India, Singapore, Malaysia, or English is also being used in context where they were not, in this case, colonized, but because of its global importance, talking about English, these countries are now using the language as a foreign language, or as some other scholars will call it, as an additional language. We're thinking about countries like Thailand, Japan, China, and what have you. So it is no doubt that the status of English has changed because of this global spread. Think about also the fact that English is also being used differently in these different contexts. Because of this shifted role in the use of English, different people in different countries tend to use English differently. This brings about diversity in how English is being used. Diversity, not just in how it is spoken, but diversity in terms of what variety it's been spoken of the English language. And so English has now become an international lingua franca. And by this, I'm going to explain in a moment. Also, think about the unprecedented global demand for English. Think about wanting to study abroad as an international student and you're placed in demand on submitting an English test. Think about wanting to study in international colleges. Think of Thailand as the case in point. They will need you to command a certain degree of proficiency in English. Think about getting an international job for an international company or working for an international institution. You would need a certain high-level degree of proficiency in English. Because of this unprecedented demand, whether in ELT or in other sectors of our well-being and life, the use and appropriation of English therefore calls for a change in teacher education, because teachers tend to play a great role in bringing about, in changing attitudes, changing beliefs, and also bringing about change in what we learn and how we learn them. Now, so I'm focusing on my talk on World Englishes in ELT teacher education. And it's important to, first of all, underscore why am I focusing on teacher education. I'll give you a couple of reasons. Actually, there are lots and lots of them. And I'm sure that you certainly have others, which I might not be able to mention here. But remember that teachers actually form the key in deciding whether and to what extent the kind of English we learn in our classroom. Think about English language teachers. They in many ways determine the kind of English we learn, and in many ways determine how we learn English. So by this very crucial role and position that they hold within ELT, they stand at a better chance to bring about pedagogical changes and dynamism in how English is being taught and learned. Also, think about teachers as people who provide real opportunities for contact. Think about your typical English language classrooms. Think about studying the classrooms where you have a diversity of students, students from your local context and students from abroad. Think about studying in a class. Think about studying in a class where think about studying in a class where you would have to do certain projects that involves engaging with other users of English, whether be it in the classroom or outside the classroom. You know, these are all responsibilities accorded to the teachers, you know, in disseminating English language knowledge. Also think about teachers as people who are likely to encourage a more flexible attitude towards a critical appraisal of prevalent norm-focused methodology. I think it's interrupting the presentation. I'm not sure. Could you
please
check?
interrupt for one? Dr. Kampi, please send a message to our friends in Nodi Dang.
Yes,
to turn off the microphone, please, right now. Thank you. So sorry, Dr. Eric.
That's
for
okay.
this inconvenience.
All right, so think of teachers as people who can be able to influence a flexible attitude, in terms of what we should learn. Because the argument goes like this within World English is that if you study with a professor who is more flexible and dynamic in terms of appreciation for the diversity of English, then that kind of attitude is being passed on to the learners. But if you study with a professor who tend to be native norm focused, who says without British or American English, then you're not learning English, then that kind of tendency, seem to be passed on to the students, and the next generation grows up with this kind of bias towards other varieties of English. So once we are able to get the teachers to have a change in mindset, to have a change in their approach to teaching, then we are certain of a better next generation in terms of appreciation for diversity and appreciation for variety in terms of how English is being used. So let me give you a brief background into World Englishes and English as a lingua franca. WE, of course, stands for World Englishes. There are different abbreviations to this, but each time you see me using WE, it's for World Englishes. And simply put, World Englishes simply acknowledges or says that there are different varieties of English. Remember, I talked earlier about the global spread of English and how different countries today now use English for different purposes, and they use it in ways that are uniquely theirs. These ways, in most cases, don't reflect how the language is used in native speaking context. But again, it's comprehensible and it reflects the local culture and identity of the speakers who use the language. And so what World Englishes simply advocates is that we should not prioritize a single variety of English. Remember, World Englishes is not saying that we should dismiss native British or American English. But what we are simply saying is that each variety of English has its place as per the purpose. For example, if you think of taking an international English exams like TOEFL or IELTS, you should be focusing on a native variety of English. But if you're thinking about communicating within your own local context with other users of English, then you really don't need to go native. So what we are saying, from a World English's perspective, is that we should be able to have this open and broadened mindset in terms of recognizing diversity of Englishes. So we talked about under World Englishes, we'll talk about things like Thai English, Malaysian English, Singaporean English, Nigerian English, and what have you, all the different kinds of Englishes. So what we simply do is to create an awareness, and I'm guessing this is why we ELT-BRU is organizing this first symposium to create this kind of awareness that we don't just in the world today have British and American Englishes, but we do also have other varieties of Englishes that are worth recognizing and that are worth acknowledging. So this is actually what we are saying from a World English's perspective. And this is so true when you think about English as a lingua franca, because here you actually understand why it is important to actually raise this kind of World English's awareness. because now you have more users of English that are non-native speakers than you have native speakers of English. In fact, Crystal would argue that in every English language communication today, it's more between non-native speakers of English than between native speakers of English. To be more practical, that is to say that if you were to observe those who use English today, you realize that it's either a Thai speaking to a Burmese in English, or a Japanese talking to a Singaporean in English, or a Chinese talking to a Nigerian in English, than you would have an American talking to, you know, a British, for example. So the language is being used more by non-native speakers than native speakers. And so by this, it simply says that this is what ELF is all about, because the need to now negotiate how to communicate speakers from different linguistic backgrounds who don't share the same L1, but needs a medium for communication. And this is where ELF comes in and English plays a crucial role. And so it is no doubt that research within World Englishes has been quite huge. But again, when it comes to teachers' awareness in terms of appreciating diversity of Englishes, in terms of, you know, implementing World Englishes approaches in their teaching classes, it's been somewhat kind of slow. And that is why, you know, a symposium like this one is still very much relevant and important, even in 2022, because the call is kind of slow. Responses are getting, you know, higher and higher by the day. And so the message needs to be spread, because this is indeed how the language is now being used and by these different users of the language. Think about the resistance. And so these are some issues I'd like to draw your attention to when it comes to World Englishes, that good as the song sounds to the ears, but again, you still have two major camps when it comes to recent trends and issues like this in English language teaching. You still have people who think that we should not be aware of other varieties of Englishes. In fact, they put it like this, that if it's not native British or American English, then it's not good English. You know, so you still have people like this who are so native oriented focused, or you can describe them as EFL oriented pedagogue. They still think that it has to be native oriented for it to be good English. So if you were to interact or study with such kinds of teachers, and you speak some kind of Thai English or some kind of a local variety of English that's not native-like, then you'll be described as a bad English users. So some resistance have been put forward by scholars within the field why this has been quite slow in some context and by some people. First, they talk about practicality. Practicality in terms of, if we go by the argument put forth by World English scholars, then you realize that in every single country on earth where English is being used, then there's a local variety of English. So think about how many countries we have in the world today. Say, for example, we've got 100 countries. It means that we have 100 different varieties of English. And so the major resistance here is that, how then do we teach our learners all these different varieties of English without getting them confused? And they say it's not practical to teach all of these varieties to our learners. While this is true, and for which World English scholars do agree, but we are not saying that all the varieties should be taught to learners. We are simply calling for an awareness raising to make effective and possible cross-cultural, intercultural, or intracultural communications amongst or between users of English. So, for example, if you take a student studying English in Thailand as a case, we are not saying that you need to teach them all the different varieties of English, but a good place to start will be to raise their awareness to a Thai English local variety. And given that Thailand is within the ASEAN community, you might want to expose them to the different ASEAN Englishes, for example, Malaysian English, Indonesian English, Singaporean English, and what have you. That should be a good place to start, because this will certainly make up the immediate interlocutors of Thai students within and after school. Another resistance has been in terms of efficiency. They say it's just a waste of time to just talk about what English is. You know, how do we go about just talking about the different varieties of Englishes? It's just a waste of time, and it's a good place to just settle on native varieties. But of course, you would realize that why this seemed to make sense, but it's not the case, because the realistic use of English and how English is used in real context, you know, really calls for this kind of shift in our pedagogy. There are also claims in terms of standards. And the argument here is that if we expose our students to different varieties of Englishes, then they tend to speak wrong English. Remember that within current arguments in terms of the global use of English today, there is nothing like bad English or wrong English. But there is something as different users or users of English. You know, so that it doesn't sound native, doesn't make it bad. It only makes it uniquely yours. And that's what English has become. And so within discussions of the ownership of English, everybody and every country, nation can now claim ownership of English. You can take the language for what it is, use it for whatever purpose you want to use it, as long as it serves your communicative needs. All right. And so there are issues about simplicity as well, that it just sounds simple if we follow a particular standard. If we follow the British or the American standard variety of English, it makes life easier because everybody gets to learn the same thing, master the same rules and all of that. And that it seems confusing if we expose people to different varieties of English. But you wouldn't know how confusing it is until you start interacting in real life. Then you understand that people in everyday communication really don't speak native English. They speak some other kind of English that's not British nor American, something different. And they use this so creatively that it serves their communicative purposes. And that's what World Englishes seem to advocate for. And so why these are some, resistance within the field, let's talk about the way forward. As I move on, I will start having questions and discussions. Sid Hofer, he's a very prominent scholar within the field of World Englishes, and he suggests that teacher education curriculum should foster understanding in teachers. So one of the objective of this symposium, amongst us Ph.D. students and scholars and teachers, is to foster this kind of understanding of how language is being used in real life. And so if you understand the global use of English and how it's being used in real life, then that in a way impacts on how you teach it in your classroom within the general framework of communication. Also, it's also important to look at reflections upon the challenges that our students face when they have to communicate. Think about our learners. For example, you're teaching Thai kids or you're teaching Burmese kids or whatever. How many of them get to have a chance to speak with native speakers of English? Maybe in a year, not. How many of them will ever go to the United States or to the UK to get to talk English with the British or the Americans? Maybe never, maybe just one or two. So are we really preparing them for a real use of English, or we are actually just artificially trying to create some kind of Alice in a Wonderland world where learners may not be able to use what we teach them in the classroom? This calls for a rethink and a readjustment and reassessment to how we look at English and how we teach it as teachers. And so by this, we need to problematize our broader teaching within a broader pedagogy. We need to now evaluate, why do we teach English? Why do we teach English to our learners? Why do they need English? What are they going to be using English for? And so if we understand why our learners are learning English and why and in what context they're going to be using English, then it can help us as teachers to better prepare them for English. So it's going to be a waste of time for somebody who wants to work as a tour guide in Thailand, for example. It's a waste of time to, teach them just native variety of English, because according to tourism statistics in Thailand, there are more non-native users of English who visit Thailand every year as tourists than native users. A huge population of them are from China, India. These are non-native contexts, and they use English in ways that don't reflect native, context. So we need to be preparing our learners for actual real life usage of the language, so they can be useful and relevant when they talk across different users of English. And so teachers also need to be aware of cultural, diversity in how the language is used. That part of our cultural identity is the language that we use. And so by telling somebody not to speak English as a Thai means you're robbing them off of their Thainess. A colleague of mine wrote an article recently on Thainess, in English for tourism or something. So that particular unique way that Thai people use English reflects their own Thai cultural and linguistic identity, and which is something that's highly encouraged within linguistics anthropology. And so we need to critically examine these issues through active reflection, like the symposium and everything else we do. When we talk to our students, those who graduated, when we talk to our alumni, those who are working already, we want to see whether what we do in the classroom, the syllabus that we have, the curriculum that we follow, does it actually prepare our learners for actual real life practice, or there's a disjuncture that we need to close there. And so think about these issues. And so exposure now becomes very important. It becomes very important because such opportunities, as Sithofa would argue, that they are continually shifting and changing, all right? These attitudes, the way we use English and for what purpose, they are constantly shifting and changing, particularly when we look at ELT communication. And so this kind of change calls for a change within us as teachers. So instead of being static or native oriented, you might want to be a little bit dynamic and flexible in terms of actually understanding, why are you teaching English to your learners? Why are they learning English? What are they going to be using English for? In what context will they be using English? If you're able to have answers to these questions, then you'll be a very relevant teacher educator for your own students and also their life beyond the classroom. All right, as I move towards the close of my talk, so we can have more time for discussions and questions and answers, think about World English's visibility in teacher education. All right, think about it like this. Think about World English's visibility in teacher education in terms of fostering reflection. When I talk about fostering reflection, what I'm saying is that as teachers, educators, when we have, I understand that we do work in very confined context where we have prescribed textbooks to follow, maybe from the Ministry of Education, or we have strict administrative policy in terms of school policy. Maybe our teachers insist on a particular norm that we have to follow. But I think the trend today, when we look at Thailand, it's really, really changing. And it's amazing how fast things are changing within this particular context, because Thai professors and even the system itself, they're beginning to be more accommodating and more welcoming to diversity and helping learners be actually successful intercultural communicators beyond the classroom. So when we reflect on things like this, then it helps us to better think of what is suitable as materials to use for my class. So while it is good to follow textbooks, all right, because it helps to give structure to our lesson and structure to our classes, but you might want to be diverse a little bit in terms of bringing in other materials that can help raise learners' global intercultural competence or awareness within that particular classroom. So one of the ways is to foster reflection. Right. Another aspect of it is to become aware of the implications of ELT in communication and pedagogy. Remember, I said earlier that most users today are non-native users of English. Most of the people who use English, they are non-native users of English. Communication in English takes place more, between and among non-natives than you would have between and among native users of English. And so by implication, English today has truly become a global lingua franca. By this, again, we are saying that speakers who share different L1 or different mother tongue now use the language to communicate for whatever purpose, whether to shop or to negotiate a business deal or to do whatever they want to do with the language. But this is how it's become. And so if we understand this, again, it will shift our pedagogical practices, okay? It calls for a confronting of this reality. It calls for a confronting, of this, sociolinguistic practice that seemed to be ignored, for something quite superficial, like it has to be native oriented all the time. And so when we critically reflect on these issues, then we are now placed in positions as teachers where we can look at new possibilities or new paths of action. And one of such paths of actions, of course, you can think of is this symposium. And that's why, I'm really very much grateful for the PhD ELT students for organizing a symposium like this, because this is one of the actions we're talking about here. Also, think about, as teacher educators, developing a critical awareness towards issues. What are these issues? Towards issues like intercultural competence. Remember, we're talking about intercultural competence here, so by narrowing down learners to a particular cultural, practice or particular cultural, norms, what you're doing is you're limiting them within that particular culture. And once you limit them within that particular culture, then you deny them of their flexibility to be exposed to and interact with other users from a culture different from what they've been taught. And so this will render them interculturally incompetent. You see that? So we tend to have learners or students who are interculturally incompetent. Think about it in terms of pragmatics, being able to know what to say within appropriate context. And so World Englishes actually provides us a good approach in teaching English that can actually prepare learners realistically and practically so, for intercultural and intracultural interactions. Think about the sociolinguistics part of it. Think about the people we encounter every day. Think about the sales agent you meet at the shopping malls when you go to get something, groceries for your house or anything else. This again calls for changes within different practices of English, contrary to native-oriented arguments. If you think about concepts or approaches like translanguaging, for example, where discussions are now saying that we need to also start encouraging and incorporating the L1 of our learners in the classroom. This used to be a taboo discussion in the yesteryears within second language acquisition theory. But today, that same discussion is being revisited because of World Englishes and ELF and the global use of English and how different people use English differently. And so arguments are now being posed within acceptance and tolerance for the linguistics richness of our learners. So the more languages you know as a learner, the better for you. And this is highly encouraged for all these different languages or within the translanguaging concept resources to be used in the classroom. Think about multilingualism. In time past, multilingualism was seen as a bad practice. The argument within second language acquisition research would be that when you're learning English and you keep using your L1, for example, your L1 destroys, spoils your English. But that's not the case today because research has suggested that L1 actually helps learners learn best, and there are a couple of studies that can prove this to you and real-time cases. So when we think about these different issues that are going on now, intercultural competence, pragmatics, sociolinguistics, translanguaging, multilingualism, then we can critically start evaluating even our own practices as teachers and start reassessing our own attitude as teachers, to be more tolerant and accepting to diversity, because the beauty of a language is in how diverse it is used. And also don't forget that even the so-called native variety, it's also varied in its own way. If you take a typical case like the UK, for example, the English spoken in London, it's different from the English spoken in Scotland. The English spoken in Scotland is different from the English spoken in Liverpool. There is also variation within a particular variety. So what then is really a native variety of English? And so if you have this kind of understanding, then you'll be more accepting to diversity and enjoy the beauty that language affords us. Think about also designing new courses that actually meet this kind of practical needs. Think about designing courses that include other aspects that helps our learners to build a positive attitude towards World Englishes. Courses that includes things, subjects, or topics that includes things like the spread of English around the world, or Englishes around the world, or implications for teaching Englishes, or grammar-related issues arising from interactions, where you can look at tense omission, verb omission, you can look at coinages and clipping from a morphological perspective. Think about the different ways, and you can actually find lots of materials like this, within published journals. Lots of scholars, they've done quite a lot about describing different Englishes. We've got a lot of publications out there. I've got a couple of them too, giving you different distinctive features for the different varieties of Englishes and just raising an awareness of how people actually use the language, which is so different from how we think they should use the language, all right? So that's quite important as well. So think about also designing new activities for your class. So if before you would only ask students to use only native variety of English, think about giving them the freedom to express themselves in whatever variety of English they feel best. Think about matching your students, the ties with foreign students, and letting them have a conversation. Think about giving them the task on watching a video, by different speakers of English. Think about exposing them to different materials written by different textbooks writers from Thailand and overseas. Think about inviting somebody, a Filipino to your class, a Nigerian to your class, a Cameroonian to your class, a Thai to your class, so your learners get exposed to how people from different linguistic backgrounds do use the language. Think about designing all of this. And when you think about this, then you're thinking about a successful English language teaching practice within the 21st century, global spread and usage of English as a global lingua franca. So also think about providing teachers, with perspectives on ELF and English varieties. Again, I've talked on this one, and also including them in your teaching as well. Because a big question has been, how do we incorporate World English's practice in our teaching? I wish we have time to talk about this, but I've given you lots of examples. Exposures, basically. Raising the awareness, basically. Being tolerant, basically, to different, accent differences. For example, if you want to take accent as a case, within pronunciation study, you might want to look at that. You might also want to look at grammar differences, where in some varieties, it has to be subject, verb, object, and in some other varieties, people really don't care about the tense. You can just do it whichever way. I go, you, I, okay. And people still understand that what you're saying is that I am okay, even without the verb there, all right? So intelligibility becomes a priority within discussions in World Englishes. If you can understand what I say, regardless of whether my grammar is correct or not, then communication has taken place. So think about that as a core issue to communication, all right? And so, give me a minute. Okay, good. So let me walk you through some quick principles of World Englishes in teacher education. And these are all adapted from this fine scholar in the field as well. The first is to promote intelligibility than native speaker proximity. So if you want to know as a teacher, as a scholar, how do I incorporate World English's principles or pedagogy into my teaching and learning? The first thing is you should understand the purpose for communication. We don't communicate so we can sound native. You don't speak English so you can be called an American or a British. You speak English so you can be able to achieve the purpose for which you're using the language for. For example, if I want to buy something, if I'm able to use that language to do my purchase, then I have communicated. So think about intelligibility as a key component within World English's pedagogy than just trying to raise native speakers or raising your learners to be native speakers, because truth be told, no matter how close you are to the language, you would never become a native speaker if you're not a native speaker. So why bother? Think about a second principle as to produce successful ELT users than native speakers. You want to produce students or learners who are able to use the language to communicate successfully, that they can be able to, for example, use the language to communicate with an Indian tourist, who is visiting somewhere famous in Thailand and gets to explain Thailand to them in a way that they understand, even without trying to sound native-like. This should be the focus of a successful ELT communication, because remember, I already said that communications in English today takes place largely amongst non-native users of English than native users of English. So, and our learners are likely to encounter other non-native users of English than they would with native users of English. So if we spend our time preparing them for native encounters, that may never happen in their lifetime, okay? And that will make our teaching unsuccessful. Think about also using authentic English materials that native speaking corpora. For example, think about using real life interaction, taking your students out, to a restaurant where you have other foreigners, there. Thinking about taking them to a touristic site where you've got different foreigners from different countries interact and speak with each other in English. Think about introducing them to YouTube channels owned by different users of English. American, Thais, Malaysians, Singaporeans, Burmese, and what have you. Think about exposing them to authenticity rather than just forming them to be native in their approach. I've talked about intercultural competence than fixed cultures, all right? So instead of teaching them only things about snowman, Halloween, hamburger, for example, you might also want to introduce them to other local cultures. For example, introduce them to Thai local meals like tom yum, like pad thai, and all of these things. So while it is good to understand other cultures, it's also good to know your own culture as well. And this highly encourages intercultural competence than just a fixed culture, because how many Thai students have seen a snow? Come to think about it, how many Thai students have been able to go abroad and actually see things the way they happen? But they get to eat tom yum every now and then. At least they see pad thai, being sold in Thai restaurants, and they need this information to be able to help when tourists do come here or when they want to communicate with other foreigners in English. Think about encouraging communicative skills than native correctness. So if, as a Thai person, if I say something like I okay, it doesn't sound like good English from a native speaker perspective, but it's comprehensible enough. What that simply means is I am okay. Even with the omission, you still understand and communication has taken place. And that's what gives the language its flexibility, its appropriateness, and also its beauty. So let's get to appreciate things with how language is being used. Think also about encouraging multilingual users, not monolingual users of the language. This is how we talk about things like translanguaging too, because it's not just multilingualism in terms of English, but also other languages as well. And so raising students' awareness, I've talked about that. So I'm concluding. Matsuda said this about teacher education. He says, if teachers are equipped with the analytical and reflective skills to interpret their encounter with these new concepts, the new concepts are the things I just discussed with you, they will not only gain knowledge, but they will also be able to expose these concepts to shape and reshape perception of English and also English speakers. So once again, thumbs up to our brilliant and very highly productive PhD ELT students at Buriram Rajabhat University, because this is exactly what captures what you do, and it's highly applauded for. Think about my final point as teachers needs to be aware of these practices. Why? Firstly, because it helps them to be familiar with the current sociolinguistic reality of how English is being used and how English has spread. It also helps them to understand why learners learn English, for what purpose they learn English, in what context they intend to use English. And so this kind of understanding will help in reshaping what we teach as English and how we teach English. Think about it. What we teach as English refers to the different varieties of English, and how we teach it refers to the approach we use. Is it just native oriented approach, or World English's, approach to teaching English? Secondly, teachers' awareness is very crucial in fostering World English's pedagogy in our classrooms, because it leads to a critical reflections of pedagogical implications. It causes you to reflect critically of why you do what you do and how best you can improve it so you can become an effective and a better teacher, not just to your student, but also to your own professional development in terms of attitude and knowledge. Think about the opportunities that this kind of discussion would provide, where you can actually have critical discussions about issues, about materials, about activities, about the different tasks that can help to foster this kind of idea. So remember, we live in a super diverse world where it's no longer English, but Englishes, and every variety is gaining, its legitimacy within its own local context. And so our learners within this local context needs to be aware of the different varieties of Englishes that exist to prevent confusion or resistance or shock, or even to prevent, a disrespectful or deficient attitude towards other varieties of English. That if you encounter people using English differently from how you do, then you don't consider that as wrong, broken, or bad English, but you consider that as just diversity in how English is being appropriated and used. So thank you very much for listening, and let's get to questions, discussions, and comments.
Thank you so much, Dr. Eric and Barry, for your very useful talk. We have learned a lot of teaching activities in applying World Englishes in the classroom, and also we also learn about the teachers' awareness about the World Englishes that we need to keep in mind. And anybody have any questions, feel free to turn on the microphone, or you can type your questions in the chat box.
There is a question in the chat box, Ajahn Kwan.
Okay, there's one question. Please let me read. According to issue in World Englishes, the resistance, Dr. Eric mentioned that among its pedagogical implications are practically, efficiency, and standard. Which is the best World Englishes pedagogy should Thai teacher focuses on?
Okay, thank you very much for the question. Again, these are all resistance within the field. And remember that this resistance, again, I mentioned them in terms of practicality, efficiency, standards, and all of that. They seem to be coming from a native EFL-oriented standpoint. Remember that these are resistance from people or scholars or researchers who still think that there is nothing like World Englishes. So they would say something like, there is nothing like Thai English, there is nothing like Malaysian English, there is nothing like Singaporean English. We are saying that while some of the arguments they make seem to be convincing, but when you look at the actual usage of English in real world, in real time, in real situations, you realize that what seemed to be a resistance, it's actually an opportunity for them. For example, They say it's a waste of time exposing students to different varieties of English, but it is actually their exposure and awareness to these other varieties of Englishes that gets them to become interculturally competent. You know, without which you would find users or learners who only know they know everything about the United States, nothing about Thailand, nothing about Myanmar. They know all the food seasons in the US, but know nothing about their own local culture. You know, and so this is where we're saying that even in terms of standards, for example, you know, it is good to expose your learners to native varieties, British and Americans and all of that, but it's also very, very important to expose them to their own local variety of English. Because think about when your students lead class in Thailand, in Buriram, Rajabhat University, the next place they go to is within Buriram. They don't go to Los Angeles or to London. They get to meet locals within that particular context and they have to use English with them. You want them to be effective in using English. And so exposing them to their own local variety, which is gaining legitimacy and becoming a standard alongside the native ones, it's also important. So when they meet native speakers, they can be able to communicate with them in the native whatever. And if they meet their own local, you know, interactions, they can be able to communicate within their own local variety of English. So you can actually see all of this so-called resistance as opportunities for the effective implementation of world Englishes.
Thank you for your clear answer. I missed one question before this question. I'm sorry. How can English user negotiate communication in ELF context?
So when we think about ELF context, again, I mentioned that ELF refers to English as a lingua franca. And what this means is that you have two speakers or more speakers who don't share the same first language. For example, a Thai is talking to a Burmese, for example, using English, or a Thai talking to a Japanese in English. These are two speakers, one of which has Thai as the first language, the other one has Japanese. And because neither of them can speak Thai or Japanese, they have to use English. So English in this context becomes a lingua franca. And so to negotiate communication, effective communication is they have to develop strategies to communicate. They need to develop communicating strategies, you know, and for different people, they have a different way of working out their own strategies. But we have a huge body of literature in the field that talks about different ELF communicative strategies. One of the strategies I mentioned is omission of some grammar particles. You know, others may just be gesturizing, you know, others may just be, you know, just picking a lexical word and just hanging on it as a sentence. At least there are a lot of other ways you can actually negotiate communicative practices within an ELF context. And all of that boils down to what strategy works in helping you communicate your message and getting your interlocutor to understand what you're saying. It may not be conventional. Such strategies, I should point out, may not be conventional, but that's what ELF is all about. That in most cases, people don't sound conventional when they speak. In most cases, people don't sound American when they speak. In most cases, people don't sound British when they speak. People just sound them when they speak. I go to you now, okay, Cap. You know, it's just who they are. And that's the beauty of using a language, reflecting your own linguistic and cultural identity. So strategies are the key.
Okay, one more question from the chat box. What are the tangible effects of increased exposure to world Englishes on students' ability to use English as a global language?
Beautiful. There are actually, think about this question and think about lots of tangible effects, many of which I have mentioned. The very first you want to think about is a positive attitude towards variety and variation of English. You know, it takes away prejudicial attitude and bias and stereotypical attitude towards different users of the language. So you don't have, you know, and we tend to have this kind of attitude in Thailand. It's even when you look at your Thai classroom, and you have a student who speaks English, you know, like the Thai kid who was born in the States or who was born in Thailand, grew up in the States, came back to Thailand and speaks English like an American. And you have this other Thai kids who've never been outside Mahasarakham, they've never been anywhere beyond the borders of Buriram, struggling to speak English. You know, the tendency is people tend to, in quote, worship the one that speaks this very high level native standard variety of English. So by exposing our learners to different variety of English, the first effect we should be getting is change of attitude. That I speak it like a native speaker or I do it differently doesn't mean that what I do is bad. It simply speaks of diversity, and diversity is the flavor of using a language. Other things in terms of change of attitude, you're also preparing them as intercultural global citizens. You want your learners to be able to get to Malaysia and talk with the Malaysians about Malaysian culture in English, get to Myanmar and talk to the Burmese about Burmese culture, you know, get to whatever context, becoming interculturally competent. And the list goes on and on and on and on, becoming even effective as communicators, excelling even with their own professional careers, especially if they have to work within contexts where English will be used as a lingua franca. So actually the list is enormous in terms of effects with exposing learners to this kind of global use of the language.
Okay, thank you so much. I think we'll have two more last questions because we're running out of time. From Ajahn from Business English, Ajahn Sia, what Englishes should we teach in the class in case we teach Business English in lingua franca mode? How should we assess our learners? And the second question is, do you think that it is interesting if we take an advantage of corpus linguistics to investigate in BEFL discourse? Will the discourse in this context will be different from others?
Okay, the first question is about what Englishes should we teach in the class? Recent, I think this year, my colleague and I published an article on this. What English should you teach? Teach every English, not only native English, teach every English. In fact, to make it more practical, because when I say every English, that's a little bit confusing, but start from here. Start teaching or raising your learners' awareness about their own local variety of English. And if we want to go beyond Thailand, we look at ASEAN, expose them to different ASEAN Englishes. That's because these are their immediate interlocutors. So think about your learners and think about the people your learners are going to be meeting. Who are their immediate interlocutors outside the classroom? That should be your target norm or the target variety you should be teaching. Because what is the point of wasting 5 years teaching them American English and none of them gets to the US or gets to talk to an American? That's not effective. So think about your immediate interlocutor, all right? So there is no answer to teach this variety and not this variety, but it calls for an incorporation of every variety that the learner is likely to be exposed to outside the classroom, okay? And so when you think about business English, this becomes even more beautiful in terms of variety exposure. Now, the second thing you're asking is, do you think it's interesting to take advantage of corpus linguistics to investigate business English as a foreign language? Yes, of course. Why this is quite good, but remember that it still has its own limitations because business English as a foreign language corpus usually would be based on very native varieties and native accent and native vocabulary. There are today other corpus or other corpora that involves other varieties of English. If you go to the website of Kirkpatrick, he has a beautiful corpora that involves ELF interactions within business context in Asia. He covers Southeast Asia and East Asia as well. So there are other beautiful corpora that you can take advantage of and complement that with the BEFL corpora, and you'll be having a very interesting data to look at or approach to use in your classroom.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Eric, for your clear and insightful answer. Next, I would like to invite Associate Professor Dr. Akharapon Neomai-Hom to deliver a thankful message to Dr. Eric and Billy, please. Please turn on your microphone.
Actually, we have one more question. That's proof that Dr. Eric talks very interesting indeed. But just keep this question with us and waiting until the proper time that Dr. Eric is coming to deliver a speech in person at the U campus. So in order to get an answer, wait for some time. All right, that's our techniques. I request Dr. Eric, please keep something as a top secret.
That's always my strategy.
So we are going to carry out Eric series, not Korean series. Right? This is the first series. So if you are a big fan of Dr. Eric, okay, keep it in mind and just wait for some time. There will be informed soon about a webinar or on-site workshop that will be carried out by Dr. Eric. Please be informed that Dr. Eric is our regular professor. Whenever we invite him to give academic talk, he always provides us with academic support. We really appreciate his academic assistance. So on behalf of the organizing committees and also all participants from different universities, please join me in giving a big round of applause to our guest speaker today for his insightful talk. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Great.
Thank you so much, Dr. Eric and Mary, and also thank you, our Dean, for the thankful message. Next, may I introduce our second invited speaker, Professor Ni Hlaing from Mandalay University of Distance Education, Myanmar. Currently, Professor Ni Hlaing is a Professor Emeritus of English Department at Mandalay University of Distance Education, Myanmar. She has got a bachelor degree from Yangon Institution of Education, specializing in teaching of English, and she completed her Master of Art in English from University of Yangon. In 2000, she was promoted as an associate professor, and in 2001, as a professor. She has over 40 publications in peer-reviewed journal of internationals and in different international and national forums, conference and symposium in Australia, Bosnia, Cambodia, China, Japan, Malaysia, Myanmar, Philippines, Shanghai, Singapore, Thailand, and the UK. And today she's here with us, and her title of her speech is The Emergence of World Englishes, Implication of English Language Teaching. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me to welcome her, Professor Ni Hlaing.
Thank you.
Can I interrupt for a while? Because Dr. Professor Ni Hlaing is a friend of mine. We have been working together at least, I think, about 15 years already. So just now my student Silapapa pronounced a little bit wrong her name, like my name. When Thai people pronounce my surname, that's okay, no problem, perfect. Nưa Mai Hom. But my foreign friends pronounce my surname not Nưa Mai Hom, not good smell, good, but it's bad smell, become Nưa Mai Hom, just like that. It's not Hom, it's Nưa Mai Hom. Similar to Professor Ni, her surname is Hlaing, not Liang, all right? Professor Ni Hlaing. No, so please bear in mind because she will be our regular professor giving different topics on different occasions. So next time, if you are going to invite her, the correct pronunciation of her name is Ni Hlaing. Okay, so it's time for listening to her very special talk. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Akharapon. So let me share my screen, please. Very good afternoon, Dr. Eric Emberley and my friend Dr. Ekrapon Ni Hlaing, Dean of Faculty of Humanities and Social Science, Buriram Rajabhat University, and my dear PhD students from batch 1 and 2 of PhD in ELT, Buriram Rajabhat University, Thailand. So very good afternoon and Minglaba to you all. Today, I'm going to deal with the emergence of world Englishes, implications for English language teaching. So I am Professor Ni Hlaing from Myanmar. So let me introduce with the idea of Jenkins 2003 and Kirkpatrick 2007. English language has shifted from being a language that was primarily used to serve native speakers intra-national purpose to becoming an international medium in lingua franca communication. The English language has shifted from being a language, and its phenomenal spread implies that it serves as a communicative tool not only for native to native or native to non-native interactions, but also for meaningful interactions among non-native speakers. So due to its large geographical reach, English has come to be learned as a second language or spoken by a large number of people. So according to Gradle 2007, approximately 2 billion people are said to have English knowledge. Statistics from various sources also show that the number of non-native speakers has significantly outnumbered that of native speakers. In light of this, Katcheru 1992 and Widdowson 1994 have argued that English becomes a denationalized language in which it is not anymore tied to native speakers in terms of linguistic usage. In this connection, Widdowson 1994 asserts that the very fact that English is an international language means that no nation can have custody over it. It is a matter of considerable pride and satisfaction for native speakers of English that their language is an international means of communication. But the point is that it is only international to the extent that it is not their language. It is not a possession which they lease out to others while still remaining the freehold. According to Widdowson 1994, other people actually own it. So stated changing trend of English, the traditional English language teaching, ELT orientation that centers on native speaker linguistic monocentricity has been called for a pattern shift in order to be more accurate with the current profile of English. So drawing specifically on the context of education, this talk aims to critique the ELT assumptions that rest on the native speaker ideological paradigm. So we will discuss how such pedagogical assumptions are unattainable and inconsistent with the sociolinguistic and socio-political realities of context where English is used as a lingua franca. Our focus is to provide a discussion of how the international status of English and the emergence of world Englishes suggests for implications for ELT in the era where English functions as an international language. More specifically, we will review some pedagogical guidelines with reference to the notion of English as an international language, EIL, that can be usefully implemented in ELT curricula to raise language learners' awareness or recognition of the existence of world Englishes. Here, let me deal with my second topic, the international status of English. Without doubt, English has acquired the international status and has become a truly international language. To highlight the international role of English, many scholars have tried to introduce English as a global language.